Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy Edit. Today's video, we are going to talk about my must-own early round wide receivers for fantasy football in 2021. Inside this video, we are going to talk about one wide receiver from the first 3 rounds. I'm going to give you a wide receiver in the first round, second round, as well as in the third round that I want to talk about today and that I will have dubbed as a must-own wide receiver for fantasy football in 2021. Now, obviously, we're in April before the 2021 NFL draft, so things can definitely change by the time you guys are drafting in August or early September. So if you guys are new to my YouTube channel and you want more fantasy football content, you want more NFL content, you want more NFL draft content, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football leagues. So let's get into it. We begin in round number 1. Round number 1 based off of current ADP. I got this from rotowire.com. They actually compile a couple of websites' ADP together to get a more accurate look than what I was looking at previously. Round 1 ADP begins with Christian McCaffrey, followed by Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Davante Adams, Travis Kelce, Ezekiel Elliott, 9-inch Nicholas Chubb, Tyreek Hill, and Cam Akers. So only 2 wide receivers in the first round and only 3 non-running backs in the first round. So the first round is always going to be heavily dominated by the running back position. I know that this is not the topic of the video, but I figured I would tell you this because a lot of people are looking to get their running back in the first round, looking to get one of those workhorse running backs because there's only so many guys, at least right now, based off of the current NFL, that are true workhorses on their team, and they go in the first round. So if you want to make sure to get one, that's why a lot of people are drafting running backs early on in the draft and why so many running backs go in the first round. So we have a choice between 2 running backs here, either Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers or Tyreek Hill. And for me, I'm going to want to talk about my must-own early round wide receiver for round 1 is going to be Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers. Now, I know most people say, hey, the wide receiver 1 is likely not to repeat in back-to-back seasons. That's true. Just like it's true with running back, just like it's true with quarterback. Now, tight end, I would say it's actually the most common position for repeat to happen because it seems like Travis Kelce is just so much above the other guys. Not saying that he's like way better than Kittle or way better than Waller, but at least in fantasy terms, it seems like he is. But I digress. Back to it. I like Davante Adams a lot. Last year in just 14 games, he finished as the wide receiver 1 in all formats. That's PPR, half PPR, as well as standard leagues, averaging 25.6 PPR points per game, 21.5 half PPR points per game, and 17.4 standard points per game. And from a points per game perspective, he was wide receiver 1 in all formats as well. So I like to bring up the points per game perspective on a finish because the points per game finish matters a whole ton because some guys are going to just finish super high at their position because, hey, they played 16 games and other guys were playing 12. But now you know that Adams played 14 games. He was number 1 in all categories, which means, obviously, points per game, he was number 1 in all categories as well. He was dominating game in and game out. The 6'1", almost 20 or 28-year-old wide receiver, 212 pounds. Now, Davante Adams has had great seasons for at least the last 4 years, and the Green Bay Packers are not looking to switch anything up. Now, obviously, in the NFL draft, they could bring in another wide receiver with their later pick in the first round or maybe in the second round, but that does not really concern me because it seems like the Packers just like to tickle the balls of everyone. Instead of just drafting a wide receiver last year, instead, they elect to draft Jordan Love, who has yet to play a game, and I doubt will play next year, obviously, unless Aaron Rodgers ends up getting hurt. So even if they bring in someone, I'm not ultra concerned. I think Davante Adams will still be a dominant wide receiver in the NFL. Last year, this motherfucker had 149 targets, 10.6 per game, 4th at wide receiver. He had a grand total of 115 receptions on those 149 targets, second most in the NFL for 1,374 receiving yards, almost 100 yards per game, 4th most at wide receiver, and he had 19 total tugs, number 1 at the wide receiver position. He also had the number 1 yards after the catch, 587. This guy is overall dominant in all aspects of the game. It's pretty simple, even with the fact that he's not even in the top 10 of target rates at the wide receiver position, which to me is very surprising because when you think of the Green Bay Packers, you think about how much they throw the ball to Davante Adams, and he was only the 13th highest targeted wide receiver in the NFL based upon target rate of the offense with 32.3%. And his yards per reception is also pretty low, 11.9, 66 that wide receiver, but he's just going to be getting so much volume. And every time he gets the ball thrown to him, he's going to catch it with a 77.2% catch rate, 5th most at the wide receiver position. Again, nothing's really changing. Some people will panic, oh, Nick, he scored 18 touchdowns. He won't be able to do that again. Blah, 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 blah. The same shit was said about Aaron Jones. He can't score this many touchdowns again. And guess what? He didn't score that many touchdowns again, but he still finished super high at the running back position. This Packers offense is going to be potent in scoring points. This guy has game-winning potential week in and week out. This guy had multiple 40-point performances, according to Player Profiler. 41.6 points week 1 up against Minnesota. Week 16 up against Tennessee in that snow game. 43.2 points in that game up against Malcolm Butler. Multiple 30-point games. And he doesn't really have that many games where he scores under 10 points. He's pretty much always over at least 18. And he averaged on the season 25.6 PPR points per game. So again, I am not at all concerned about some type of insane regression for Davante Adams. Sure, he is one of those guys that seems to be missing 2 to 3 games every single year. But at the end of the day, if you are going to be drafting a wide receiver in the first round, in my opinion, it's got to be Davante Adams, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers. In the second round of ADP, it begins with Davante Adams' teammate, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. Running back, followed by Austin Eckler, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Swift, DeAndre Hopkins, Antonio Gibson, James Robinson, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, just kidding, J.K. Dobbins, Justin Jefferson, and Darren Waller. So we got Diggs, that's 1 wide receiver. We got D-Hop, that's 2. We also have Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, and Justin Jefferson. So that's 5 wide receivers in this round compared to 2 in the first round. Now, again, this is ADP from this website, but a lot of the time the second round is also, well, it is in this case too, heavily dominated by the running back position. The third round is when you start seeing the wide receivers typically sprinkle out and everyone is jumping on the wide receivers because everyone already has their workhorse running backs, their 1-2 punch at the running back position. So out of all of those guys, I do like them all. I don't really see any of those guys really as being busts, besides maybe DK Metcalf isn't a guy I'm necessarily really targeting in the second round. Does that mean I think he's shit? No, but the guy I want to talk about here is wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, Calvin Ridley. I also talked about Justin Jefferson in a video a couple days ago titled Must Own Second Year Wide Receivers, and obviously that guy was dominant in year 1, so that's kind of a no-brainer. Calvin Ridley, 6'1", 189 pounds out of Alabama, 26.3 years old. Now, with Calvin Ridley last season, he played in 15 games and finished as the wide receiver 5 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 4 in the standard format, averaging 18.8 PPR points per game, 15.8 half PPR points per game, and 12.8 standard points per game, meaning from a points per game perspective, he finished as wide receiver 4 in PPR as well as in half PPR and wide receiver number 3 in standard. Now, a lot of people will start to think, oh, Nick, now that Julio Jones is going to likely be back for the whole season, I know you like Julio Jones, you said that a couple videos ago. What does that mean for Calvin Ridley? Well, what it means for Calvin Ridley is nothing. Last season, Calvin Ridley did do worse when Julio was on the field, but, you have to note that years prior, he was actually better with Julio Jones on the field, so I'm going to read these numbers off, but again, I'm not buying heavily into these, and I also don't believe Calvin Ridley will even be a second-round pick by the time we're drafting in August. I think he'll move back into the third round once they inevitably potentially make this selection 2 weeks from now on April 29th, and they select tight end Kyle Pitts out of Florida, maybe. But I do believe that Calvin Ridley's quarterback will be Matty Ice Baby. So in 8 games with Julio versus 7 without, you should see it on the screen right now. You probably can't even see me. And the funny thing is, look, now you can see my hands at the top of the screen, but you can't even see me John Cena style. So in his 8 games with Julio versus his 7 without, with Julio Jones, he was averaging 14.95 half PPR points per game. Without Julio, 16.99. For PPR, was 17.45 per game versus 25.0 or 20.56 without Julio Jones. With Julio Jones in standard, not as much of a difference, 12.45 with Julio versus 13.41 without. The difference is obviously in the receptions and the targets. 5 receptions with Julio Jones in the lineup versus 7.14 without. 0.75 touchdowns with Julio Jones in the lineup, which is interesting, versus 0.43 without. 8 targets with Julio Jones, and 11.29 without, and then 76.12 receiving yards per game with Julio Jones versus 109 without. The only number that was higher, obviously, was the touchdowns when Julio Jones was in the lineup. That's very interesting, but maybe it's because Julio doesn't score any touchdowns, so when he's not there, Calvin Ridley's going to have to catch it, because that's a huge knock on Julio Jones. So overall on the year, Mr. Calvin Ridley had 143 targets, 7th most at the wide receiver position for 90 receptions, 11th most at wide receiver position, 1,374 receiving yards, 4th most at wide receiver, and a grand total of 9 tugs, 9th most at the wide receiver position. He had the highest unrealized air yards at the wide receiver position, as well as the highest completed air yards at the wide receiver position with 1,095 completed air yards and 968 unrealized air yards. And just like even further back than Davante Adams, this guy finished as the wide receiver 5 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and 4 in standard, with only a 25.9% target rate in the offense, 34th most. So even without Julio, he's not even getting an absorbent amount of targets for the team-wise, and he's still dominating. So you have to understand that Calvin Ridley is probably going to have yet another good season. He's been on a heater. 2019, 2020 have been both very good seasons. I think that he should easily be able to repeat in 2021. If you guys have ended up enjoying this video thus far, please again make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Next up is round 3. Round 3 begins with quarterback Patrick Mahomes, followed by Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, George Kittle, Joe Mixon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, A.J. Brown, David Montgomery, Michael Thomas, Keenan Allen, Josh Allen, double Allen, and then triple Allen, with Allen Robinson closing out the 3rd round. And the wide receiver that I would like to talk about out of A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, and Michael Thomas and Allen Robinson is going to be the guy without the name Allen in his name, or without Thomas. We're talking about A.J. Bizzle, A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans. Now, it is the assumption is that they will end up drafting a wide receiver in the draft, but does that hurt A.J. Brown? Probably not, and I think that A.J. Brown is going to get fed even more because we don't see Corey Davis being there anymore. He is now in a New York Football Jets uniform, so it's going to be A.J. Brown, some rookie, and a bunch of other bums at the wide receiver position, and Derrick Henry on this offense. And as we all know, Derrick Henry struggles when it comes to getting receptions out of the backfield. So it's really going to be leaning on A.J. Brown's back. 6 feet tall, 226 pounds out of Ole Miss, 23.8 years old. Now, A.J. Brown last season in 14 games finished as wide receiver 14 in PPR, 12.5 PPR, and wide receiver 10 in standard, averaging 17.2 PPR points per game, 14.8 half PPR points per game, and 12.2 standard points per game. From a points per game perspective, he was wide receiver 7 in PPR, tied with Will Fuller, wide receiver 5.5 PPR, also tied with Will Fuller, and wide receiver number 6 in standard. So obviously, in the case of A.J. Brown, missing a couple of games really hurt him, because from a points per game perspective, he finished much higher, which is obviously why we note this. Now, like I said, without Corey Davis there, I think we could really just see A.J. Brown getting straight up guzzled with targets, just force-fed every fucking down with the ball. Last year, A.J. Brown had 106 targets, 30th most at wide receiver for 70 receptions, 27th most at wide receiver for 1,073 receiving yards, 14th most at wide receiver, and 11 total touchdowns, 5th at the wide receiver position. Now, this guy is something special, though. 15.3 yards per reception, 18th most at the wide receiver position, 10.1 yards per target, 10th most at wide receiver, and yards per route run, 2.76, second highest at the wide receiver position. So again, A.J. Brown is on a good team. All 3 of these guys are on good teams, in my opinion. Now, you might say, oh, the Atlanta Falcons aren't a good team. Maybe they don't have good defense, but they're a good offense. Green Bay Packers, obviously a good offense, as well as the Tennessee Titans. I think that A.J. Brown should easily be able to repeat as a potential top 12 wide receiver. Now, I understand, again, he didn't finish inside the top 12 in PPR, but he didn't have PPR as well as in standard leagues, and I think that this offense without Corey Davis, like I said, is just going to have to force feed A.J. Brown the ball, and we've seen when A.J. Brown gets the ball, he does special things. I think he's going to be able to do some more special things in 2021. I like the Titans a whole lot, especially if they add to their defense in the 2021 NFL Draft. So, thank you guys all so much for watching. We're about 15 minutes into this video. Talked about 3 receivers, gave you about 5 minutes per receiver. So if you did end up enjoying again, please make sure to leave a subscribe. Hit the subscribe button down below. Make sure to leave a comment if you made it all the way through here. Comment something about Airheads. I fucking love Airheads. Have a great rest of your guys' day. I love you all. Thank you guys so much for staying throughout the whole video. Have a great rest of your guys' day. Stay safe and happy Friday, baby. It is officially almost the weekend. I love you guys all. Stay safe as always. Goodbye.